The smell of pot roast filled the Westbrook family dining room, mixing with the scent of expensive cologne and casual condescension. I sat in my usual spot, to the right of my husband Thomas, across from his sister Patricia, and diagonal from his father, George Westbrook, who was mid-lecture about the decline of American business. The problem with today's economy, George announced, cutting his meat with the same precision he used to cut down employees, is that everyone thinks they're an expert. Every housewife with a Facebook page thinks she's a CEO. Patricia laughed, her MBA from Northwestern apparently immunizing her from the category of housewife. So true, Dad. Remember that woman at the country club who tried to give you supply chain advice? Ridiculous, George scoffed, as if someone who spends her days planning dinner parties could understand the complexities of manufacturing. Thomas shifted uncomfortably beside me, under the table, his hand found mine, squeezing gently. He knew, of course, he'd helped me file the paperwork for my third company last month, but we'd agreed my business was my business, and his family didn't need to know. What do you think, Emma? George turned to me, his gray eyes sharp with barely concealed disdain. Do housewives understand business? I smiled, setting down my fork with deliberate calm. I think anyone can understand business if they take the time to learn. Learn? He laughed, the sound echoing off the formal dining room walls. From where? Pinterest? Mommy blogs? Those little craft businesses you ladies do on Etsy? George, Thomas's mother, Helen, said quietly from her end of the table. 30 years of marriage had taught her when to intervene and when to stay silent. This was apparently a staying silent moment, because she immediately returned to her salad. I'm serious, George continued, warming to his theme. I had a supplier last month, woman-owned business, diversity hire probably, completely botched our orders. Took them 3 weeks to sort out what should have been a simple shipment. This is what happens when housewives play businesswoman. My smile widened. Which supplier was that? Meridian Industrial. Supplies our packaging materials. He waved dismissively. I'm already looking for a replacement. Can't have amateurs handling critical supply chains. I took a sip of wine. Meridian Industrial, my second company, purchased 6 months ago when the previous owner retired. The botched order he mentioned had been a delay caused by George's own purchasing department sending the wrong specifications. We'd eaten the cost of their mistake and expedited the corrected order at no charge. Speaking of business, Patricia interjected, I just landed the Hoffman account. $3 million in consulting fees over 2 years. That's my girl. George beamed. See, this is what real business acumen looks like. Patricia understands the corporate world. Congratulations, I offered, genuinely meaning it. Patricia was good at her job, even if she did think my daily uniform of jeans and cardigans meant I spent my days watching Netflix. Thanks, Emma. How's your little thing going? What was it? Online selling? It's fine, I said mildly. My little thing had grossed $12 million last year, but who was counting? You should really think about getting back to real work once you and Tommy have kids, George advised, using the nickname he knew Thomas hated. Children need their mothers at home, but until then, you could contribute something meaningful. I'll keep that in mind. Thomas's hand tightened on mine. I could feel his tension, his desire to speak up warring with years of conditioning. George Westbrook had built his manufacturing empire on the backs of people he deemed lesser, women, minorities, anyone who didn't fit his narrow definition of business success. Fighting him directly was like boxing shadows. But there were other ways to fight. After dinner, while the men retired to George's study for brandy and Patricia helped Helen clear, I'd been banned from kitchen duty after the great dishwasher incident of 2019. I excused myself to the bathroom. Instead, I slipped into the small office Helen used for household management and pulled out my phone. 3 emails waited, all marked urgent. The first from my CFO at Pinnacle Solutions, we'd just acquired a major competitor. The second from my operations manager at Meridian, a new client wanted to place a rush order. The third from my assistant at Conway Logistics, my first and largest company. We'd been approved for the government contract I'd been chasing for 2 years. I smiled, typing quick responses. Then I opened a new email to my team at Meridian. Effective immediately, implement the following pricing changes for Westbrook Manufacturing. Packaging materials, plus 15%. Shipping supplies, plus 20%. Custom orders, plus 40%. Rush delivery fees, plus 50%. Cite current inflation rates and increased raw material costs. Ensure all communication remains professional. This is a standard market adjustment affecting select accounts. I hit send, used the bathroom for appearance's sake, and returned to find the family gathered in the living room. George was mid-story about his latest golf victory. Emma, he called out as I entered. I was just telling Tommy he should take up golf. All the best deals are made on the course, though I suppose you wouldn't understand that. I prefer tennis, I said, settling beside Thomas. Of course you do. His smile was patronizing. Country club tennis with the other wives? Sometimes. I didn't mention that my doubles partner was the CEO of one of the largest retail chains in the Midwest, or that we'd structured a multi-million-dollar distribution deal between sets last month. The next Sunday, George was in a fouler mood than usual. Inflation is killing us, he announced over Helen's perfectly cooked lamb. Meridian just raised their prices, 40% on some items. Highway robbery. That seems steep, Patricia commented. Can't you negotiate? Already tried. They claim raw material costs have skyrocketed. He stabbed his meat aggressively. This is what happens when the economy lets amateurs run wild. Housewives and diversity hires thinking they can charge whatever they want. Have you considered switching suppliers? I asked innocently. Of course I have, he snapped, but they've got us over a barrel. They're the only company that can handle our custom specifications on the timeline we need. It would take months to onboard someone new. That's unfortunate. I took a delicate bite of lamb. I suppose you'll have to pay it, or find ways to cut costs elsewhere. His eyes glinted, starting with personnel. Amazing how many people become expendable when margins tighten. Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. Dad, you can't just. Business is business, son. Something your wife wouldn't understand. George turned to me. No offense, Emma. I'm sure managing a household has its own challenges, but real business requires tough decisions. No offense taken, I assured him. You're right. I couldn't possibly understand the complexity of paying suppliers what they're worth. Helen changed the subject to Patricia's upcoming vacation, but George continued to stew. Throughout dinner, he muttered about price gouging, market manipulation, and the decline of business ethics. If only he knew. A month later, the complaints had evolved. Meridian had not only maintained their price increases but had also tightened payment terms. George's company, accustomed to paying net 60, was now required to pay net 30 with no exceptions. It's predatory, he fumed, pacing Helen's pristine living room. They know we can't switch suppliers quickly. They're taking advantage. Maybe they need the cash flow, Thomas suggested carefully. Smaller companies often. Smaller? George laughed bitterly. They're not small anymore. Bought out 2 competitors last year. Someone's bankrolling them, and I'd bet it's some liberal investment fund trying to corner the market. I hid my smile behind my wine glass. No liberal investment fund, just a housewife with a laptop and a very good understanding of supply chain management. Have you tried building a relationship with the owners? I asked. Sometimes a personal connection. Owners? George scoffed. It's all shell companies and holding groups now. Conway Logistics owns Meridian Industrial, but try finding out who owns Conway. It's like Russian nesting dolls. How frustrating. I sympathized. Conway Logistics LLC was registered in Delaware, owned by EMW Holdings, which was owned by a trust I'd set up years ago. My lawyers had done excellent work. The whole system is rigged, George continued. Real businessmen like me, who built things with our bare hands. We're being pushed out by paper pushers and diversity quotas. George, Helen said sharply. That's enough. He grumbled but subsided, returning to his chair with the air of a dethroned king. 3 months into the new pricing structure, I sat across from Thomas in our home office, the one George had never seen. The one with walls covered in business awards and framed contracts worth more than George's entire company. You have to tell him, Thomas said for the 100th time. This is getting ridiculous. Why? I asked. Reviewing Meridian's quarterly reports, revenue was up 32%, largely thanks to the Westbrook account and several other problem customers who'd received similar price adjustments. He's paying market rate for the first time in years. The previous owner gave him sweetheart deals because they were golf buddies. He's talking about layoffs. Real people could lose their jobs. I looked up from my laptop. Did you know your father pays his female employees 30% less than their male counterparts? That he's been cited twice for OSHA violations he never fixed? That he's fought every single workers' comp claim for the last decade? Thomas's shoulders sagged. I know he's not perfect. He's a dinosaur, and he's had 40 years to evolve. If he has to lay people off because he can't afford to pay fair prices to his suppliers, maybe he shouldn't be in business. That's cold. That's business. I closed my laptop. The real kind. Not the boys' club version he's been playing at. So you're going to keep letting him insult you every Sunday while you secretly control his supply chain? Yes, I smiled. It's called strategic positioning. Another thing housewives wouldn't understand. Thomas shook his head but kissed me anyway. You're terrifying sometimes. Only sometimes? That Sunday, George was almost apoplectic. One of his competitors, a woman-owned business he'd mocked for years, had just landed a major government contract. Diversity quotas, he spat. Pure and simple. Conway Logistics doesn't have half our experience, but because the owner's probably some minority woman, they get handed contracts. I nearly choked on my water. Conway Logistics, my company, the contract I'd won through 2 years of aggressive bidding, superior technology, and a track record of on-time delivery that George's company couldn't match. Maybe they had a better proposal, Patricia suggested, surprising everyone. Better? George's face turned red. We've been in business for 40 years. What could some upstart possibly offer that we can't? Innovation? I suggested mildly. New technology? Better pricing? Housewife economics? George dismissed. They'll undercut everyone, deliver garbage, and be bankrupt in 2 years. Mark my words. I marked them all right. Marked them down in my mental ledger alongside every other insult, slight, and dismissal. The government contract was worth $18 million over 5 years. It would fund my expansion into 3 new states and create over 200 jobs, good jobs, with equal pay and comprehensive benefits. After dinner, Helen pulled me aside in the kitchen. I know, she said quietly. I froze. Know what? Maybe not the specifics, but I know you're not just a housewife. Haven't been for years. She handed me a dish to dry. The way you talk about business, the questions you ask, you understand more than you let on. Helen, I don't need details, but I need to know, are you hurting him to hurt me? I met her gaze. Helen Westbrook, who'd given up her own career as a chemical engineer to raise George's children, who'd spent 40 years being told her place was in the home, who'd watched her husband dismiss and belittle women while she stood silently by. No, I said honestly, I'm charging him fair market prices. If that hurts him, it's because his business model depends on exploiting suppliers. She nodded slowly. Good, good, he's my husband. I love him, but he's also a fossil who refuses to adapt. Maybe this will teach him something. She paused. Probably not, but a woman can hope. You could have been running that company, I said quietly. Thomas told me about your degree, your patents. Different time. Helen's smile was sad, but I'm glad it's not your time anymore. We finished the dishes in companionable silence. 2 women who understood business better than George Westbrook ever would, one who'd been silenced by her generation, one who'd found power in staying silent by choice. A year later, at the annual Westbrook Manufacturing Christmas party, George stood to give his traditional toast. The crowd was smaller than usual. The promised layoffs had materialized, though he'd managed to keep the company afloat by cutting his own salary and bonuses, a move that had shocked everyone. It's been a challenging year, he admitted, raising his glass. Market forces, inflation, increased competition, but we've survived, we've adapted. I stood with Thomas near the back, wearing a simple black dress and the satisfied smile of someone whose companies had all posted record profits. We've learned that business isn't just about who you know or how long you've been around, George continued, the words seemingly painful. It's about efficiency, innovation, and, he paused, like the next word might choke him, diversity of thought. A murmur rippled through the crowd. George Westbrook, champion of the Old Boys Network, preaching diversity? To survival, he concluded, raising his glass higher, and to the future, whatever it may bring. As the crowd drank, Patricia appeared at my elbow. Did you hear? Dad's bringing in a consulting firm to modernize operations, some hotshot company that specializes in supply chain optimization. Oh? I sipped my champagne. Which firm? Phoenix Consulting, woman-owned. Apparently, Dad specifically requested them. She shook her head in amazement. I never thought I'd see the day. I hid my smile. Phoenix Consulting was my newest acquisition, purchased just last month. I hadn't planned on working with Westbrook Manufacturing, but if George was finally ready to enter the 21st century, who was I to deny him the opportunity? Things change, I said simply. Speaking of change, Patricia lowered her voice. I've been meaning to ask you something. I'm thinking of starting my own firm, and I could use advice on structure, funding, that sort of thing. I know you do some online selling, but you seem to understand business pretty well she caught herself. For a housewife? She had the grace to blush. I was going to say for someone without formal training. I'd be happy to help, I said, genuinely meaning it. Patricia was brilliant. She just needed to unlearn some of her father's lessons. Why don't you come by for coffee next week? I'll show you my home office. Her eyes lit up. Really? That would be amazing. Thomas appeared, sliding an arm around my waist. Ready to go? We have that early meeting tomorrow. What meeting? Patricia asked. Just some investment stuff. Thomas said vaguely. We were meeting with the board of my newest acquisition, but that was need-to-know information. As we made our goodbyes, George approached. He looked older, grayer, humbled by the year's challenges. Emma, he said stiffly, thank you for coming. Of course, we're family. He cleared his throat. I've been thinking about what you said months ago, about suppliers deserving fair prices. You might have had a point. Oh? Business is changing, has changed. Maybe some of my views are outdated. It was the closest to an apology I'd ever get. I accepted it graciously. Change is hard, but it's necessary. Yes, well, he shifted uncomfortably. Thomas is lucky to have someone who understands that. Someone like a housewife? I couldn't resist. His face flushed. I may have been harsh in some of my generalizations. May have been? I was wrong. The word seemed to physically pain him. Helen pointed out that I'd been dismissing half the population's potential contributions. That's not just morally questionable, it's bad business. Helen's a smart woman, smarter than I've given her credit for. He paused. Smarter than I've given a lot of women credit for. It wasn't a complete transformation. George Westbrook would probably never fully embrace the modern business world, but he was trying, and that was more than I'd expected when I'd raised those prices 40% a year ago. For what it's worth, I said quietly, your company makes quality products. With the right changes, you could be thriving instead of just surviving. Any suggestions? The question seemed to surprise him as much as it did me. Hire more women, pay them equally, listen to their ideas, and maybe consider that your next supplier might be someone who doesn't look like you or think like you. He nodded slowly. I'll consider it. As Thomas and I drove home, he reached over to take my hand. You're going to help him, aren't you? Through Phoenix, maybe, if he's really ready to change, even after everything. I thought about Helen, quietly supporting my shadow campaign, about Patricia, ready to break free from her father's limitations, about the workers at Westbrook Manufacturing who deserved better than a dinosaur's death throes. Especially after everything, I decided, but this time, he's going to know exactly who he's dealing with. No more hiding behind shell companies. You're going to tell him? Eventually, when Phoenix Consulting has transformed his company, when he can't deny that a housewife saved his business. I smiled. It's called strategic timing. It's called revenge. That too. We pulled into our driveway, our modest suburban home that gave no hint of the business empire run from its spare bedroom. Tomorrow, I'd review proposals for 2 more acquisitions. Next week, I'd meet with senators about infrastructure legislation. Next month, I'd keynote a women's business conference. But this Sunday, I'd sit at George Westbrook's table again, listening to him slowly, painfully learn that business acumen doesn't come with a Y chromosome, that housewives can understand business just fine. They can even run circles around dinosaurs who never see them coming. You know what the best part is? I said as we walked to our door. What? He still doesn't know. About Conway, about Meridian, about any of it. He's getting business advice from Phoenix Consulting, never knowing the same person owns his entire supply chain. Thomas laughed. How long are you going to keep that secret? Until he says, in front of his entire family, that housewives make excellent business leaders. That could take years. I'm patient. I unlocked our door, stepping into the home that housed an empire. After all, I'm just a housewife. I've got nothing but time.